I could literally see my mother pregnant with me, like in third person. I saw myself in the crib, every, grandparents and friends and family watching and being excited. So I got to see the various stages of me as a young boy. And then it took me to the other bigger vision.
All right, welcome to the New Age Human Podcast. I'm your host, John Estacio, and today we're talking with my friend, Constantin Morun, who is a holistic life empowerment mentor and coach. Now, he wasn't always in this field. He actually was doing something completely different, and you'll find out. But what we do talk about is his transformational ayahuasca experience that changed everything. So stay tuned. Now, if you want to support the show, feel free to go to newagehuman.com. And on the upper right, hit that contact button. I'm looking for some feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? And what type of content would you like to see more of in the future? With that said, let's get to the show. Constantin Morun, thank you for coming onto the show. How's it going, man?
Hey, John, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for having me on. It's going great. I mean, it's Monday. We're having a beautiful conversation ahead of scheduling this. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's dive right in.
Yeah. Let's jump right in. I definitely want to go into how everything started for you, like what you were doing before, and then what triggered you into your journey now. So go ahead, brother. I want to hear your story, man.
Yeah, I'll summarize it because we could be talking for hours. I've had an interesting journey so far. And last year I turned 40, right? So I've been around for a few decades. But I was born in Eastern Europe, in Romania, during the communist time. And it was a time of scarcity and fear. And I grew up in that environment for 7 years before the revolution happened, and then another 10 years after that as the country was in transition. And I didn't really realize what that meant for my life until much later. But that was my upbringing, right, in the Eastern Bloc. So different mentalities, different mindsets, different ways to interact with people, different ways to be with yourself, as in, like, you couldn't really be who you felt you could be. Like in my case, I knew that I was someone that was very emotional. I knew that I was someone that was very into arts, but I couldn't necessarily be that because everyone that I interacted with, from my caretakers, so my grandparents, my parents, my teachers, to everyone else was like, no, boys don't cry, boys don't paint, boys don't do A, B, and C. And I'm like, okay, so what do boys do? Science, right? Go to school, go to math, or hard labor, right? Which respectable as well. But my parents being engineers, they pushed me down the path of schooling, which I'm, of course, very grateful for because it led to a pretty good life. Meaning that at around 17, my parents decided to move to Canada to give us a better life. And they did, right? So my brother and I and them moved to Canada, and that's where I finished my high school education, and then I went on to university, and I have a mathematics degree with a background in engineering and computer science. And I've been in the tech world pretty much most of my life. Now, throughout all of that, I've had a lot of entrepreneurial adventures because I was big into gaming, and at one point I was a professional poker player for a while and coach.
Nice.
Right, and I did many different things in my life, but it wasn't until about, I would say, 2 years ago where things took a turn for the better in all aspects of life. Now, I had a successful career up to this point. I mean, I work for Microsoft to this day, but even 2 years ago, I was working at Microsoft, was being impactful in what I did, enabling people to work from home, especially during the pandemic. But I came out of it feeling very burnt out, very depressed, very anxious, because there was something missing. And I couldn't actually figure out what that missing piece was. Now, it's important to note, we talk about spiritual topics here, right? So I grew up religious, but not to any extreme. Like, I would go to church every now and then. But I never actually believed in that system. And I kind of walked away from it when I was 17, 18, when we moved to Canada. And I was agnostic most of my 20s and early 30s. And this is relevant because what happens next is really interesting because 2 years ago, I went to Ecuador. So when I was coming out of the pandemic, like most people, right, feeling a bit lower, feeling like, okay, what's the direction of my life? What's happening? I had this calling of Mother Ayahuasca, and I know you're familiar with it. And for those that are not yet, it's a plant medicine out of the jungles of the Amazon. And people talk about hearing the call of Mother Ayahuasca to come sit with this plant medicine.
Yeah, what was that calling like? Was it like a voice? Was it like you saw something on social media? I'm very curious.
For me, it was just a knowing. Literally, one morning I wake up and I'm like,
I need to get high.
why it stays on my mind, right? And of course, it's important to note a couple of things. A decade prior, when I was doing the poker coaching, one of my clients at the time, he was really big into all these alternative types of healing. And he was telling me about ayahuasca and silent retreats and a few other things. And I was like, I'll never do that, right? It's like, he was excited. I'm like, man, that's cool. You do that. I will never touch that, right? And here I am a decade later, hearing this calling. And really, it started in 2021, to be honest, but then it was still lockdowns. Not for Canadians, at least, it was very hard to get out of the country. And the way the calling was essentially is a knowing. So I wake up, I'm like, that's interesting. I do nothing with it for a few days, maybe a few weeks. And then it gets louder and louder, right? I'll have dreams about it. I'll have, I'll sit in meditation and it will come up. And then I said, you know what? I need to look into this. Now, another thing that's important to note is that I've never actually been allowing myself to be out of control, meaning that I've never been drunk, never done drugs. So for me to do something like this was very outside of my safe zone, so to speak.
Wait. You never got drunk?
Exactly. I've never got that. Well,
This is great, yeah.
Yeah, there's another story. I mean, not because I don't like drinking. I mean, I'll enjoy a glass or two. But as I grew up, I was always the older person in my friends group. So either the DD or the designated driver, or I just saw how they would get drunk and how terrible that was. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And, mixing the fact that I got married very young, I wasn't necessarily at many parties. So, circumstances led to such a way that I never actually got into it. So for me to want to do something like this, people in my life were like, that's odd. You don't do any of the stuff. Why would you want to go there? And anyway, long story short, I went to Ecuador for 3 weeks, from which 12 days were in this retreat where I sat with plant medicine, ayahuasca, and St. Pedro, which is a different type of medicine from a cactus, amazing as well, but way different. And it really transformed my life. Not only did I make amazing friendships with the people I got to bond with, which were a lot, 10 plus people, but also seeing the transformation of others with my own eyes. And keep in mind, I went there as a skeptic, but with an open mind because of my science background. I was like, how can this be? And I would see people that, one of my dear friends, for example, she could barely walk at the beginning of the journey. She had come out of 10 days in the ICU with COVID not long before, right, where she almost died 3 times. And then 7 days later, after a couple of ceremonies, she's running and playing soccer with us. And this is a 50-year-old lady.
Wow.
They can barely walk day one. And we are 10,000 feet up in the mountains, right, where like even walking a bit uphill takes your breath. So to see transformation, and there was not just, that's one great example that's close to my heart, that she's a dear friend of mine, but there were so many where I'm seeing people transform from day 1 to like day 5, day 7, day 12. And that's pretty much what started my journey. And I guess maybe we'll stop there until we go to the last 2 years, because those have been something else.
Well, so I want to just address the fact that you had acknowledged when you were younger, right? You were very creative, and that was just, they just put a pause to that. And then you went hardcore, left-brained, logic-driven, just career engineer, electronics, Microsoft, and then that burnt out. And it does sound like the burning out was because you weren't aligned with yourself, right?
Correct, yes.
Right? And then as you were burnt and crispy, you had a calling for an awakening or something that's going to help you out, a trajectory change, right? So I'm actually curious. And this is not the first time I'm hearing a story that's similar, where you get burnt out and then you hear a calling. So it's very interesting. But let's get into that trip. What do you mind sharing what you experienced on your first ayahuasca trip?
No, absolutely. I'd love to share. And yes, I'll add one thing before we jump into the sharing piece. You touched on something so important. I wasn't aligned with my heart. And for those that are seeing this as opposed to just listening, there's a sign right above here where I'm pointing, which says follow your heart. And looking back, right, because now I have 20/20 vision, being able to look back at my life, that was a huge catalyst, aligning myself with what's in my heart. And you also mentioned the idea of being artistic. Now, here's the funny thing. I because I was suppressed as much as I was as a young child, which I didn't necessarily have memories of that I could bring up whenever I wanted, I didn't actually think I was creative because I couldn't draw, I couldn't sing, I couldn't play a music instrument. So I thought, I'm not creative. Of course, as I now look back on my life and I had a chance to work with some beautiful mentors and look at what I do, I'm like, yeah, I'm creative. I mean, I've been all my life in everything I've done, including now my podcast and everything else I do. And yeah, I picked up drawing and all these other beautiful things. Now, to answer your main question, the journey. So the first time I sat with ayahuasca was day 2 of my retreat. And the reason I mentioned day 2 there is because I was sober for the first day and a half. And what I witnessed there and the interaction I had with people had me wondering what was going on. Because see, I got there knowing no one, right? And I remember the first thing, I get in there, I check in to my room, and this is very rustic because you're in the mountains, you're close to the jungle, right? So it's a beautiful place, but very rustic. I got to my room, no problem. Come back, sit down at the table to just message people home because they had Wi-Fi around the common area. And I hear 2 people talking Romanian in the background. I'm like, really? In Ecuador? 2 people talking Romanian. So I turned to them, 2 girls who became really good friends now, Romanian. But here's the funny part. One of them was from the US. One of them, was living in the US. Origin is from Romania. I'm from Canada. And the other one, even though Romanian as well, lives in Greece at the time. Right? So all of this brought us together. It was really interesting. But then as the day progressed, things got more interesting. More people came in. And as they were coming in, I had that feeling that I knew a lot of them from somewhere. I'm not sure if you've ever walked into a room where you're like, I know that person from somewhere, but I can't remember where from.
Yeah.
You might have never met these people in my life, not even once, at least in this life, the way I see it. And then I met people from Amazon, from Google, and another peer of mine from Microsoft that I haven't met before. And since then, we became very close friends.
Nice.
Like, this is really interesting. And then I sat down with one of the shamans, because before you go into medicine, you sit down with one of their traditional shamans to do kind of like a bit of a pre-cleanse and set intentions and whatnot. And that blew me away because I remember going in with him and he was asking me why I was there. And I had like 3 reasons why I was there. But the main one that I would tell people, because I didn't want to be judged, was very superficial. Like, I'm here to learn more about myself, and that's pretty much it, right? And the shaman looks at me and he's like, no, but why are you here? And I'm like, okay, this is cool. That's how it's starting. So then I got deeper, right? Emotions overwhelmed me. I cried, had a beautiful conversation. He pulled some tarot cards, which I've never actually had tarot cards pulled for me. And looking back, of course, I was like, wow, that's fairly accurate. That's interesting. How does that work? So anyway, long story short, go to the medicine. You get a lot of instructions. So I'm someone that did a lot of research going in. So I know that the intentions you set are actually very powerful. And you can ask the plant medicine. It doesn't matter if it's ayahuasca, psilocybin, or St. Pedro or anything else. You actually can put intentions where it's like, okay, be gentle with me, or do your best, or whatever the case might be. And I was actually scared, I'll be honest. So I was like, okay.
That would be too, man.
Yeah. And I said, be gentle with me. And she was. And all I could remember was like, okay, yeah, just say be gentle, be gentle. So you put your intentions. The way the ceremony goes is that it's split up in multiple parts. So the first part is all around gratitude, to be able to sit with the medicine, and you get the tobacco, which kind of clears up. That's also sacred medicine for them. And then you put your intentions in the fire before you take the medicine. And that's when I said be gentle, and all my other intentions that I came there for. And the medicine takes about half an hour to an hour to kick in. And it's interesting because you're set in a maloca. Maloca is like a gazebo that has one entrance to the south, I believe. Don't quote me on that. It might be a different direction. But anyway, and the shamans are at the top. And here's the beautiful part. The shamans take the medicine with you. So, it's not like you go to a doctor here and they're like, oh, take this medicine. I don't touch the stuff, but you take it. They take the medicine with you. And so do the firekeepers, because you have, in that case, we had 2 firekeepers at the beginning. It's usually 1 or 2. And these are people that tend to the fire, which stays on the entire night. Anyway, we get the medicine, and I had no idea what to expect. They said, it's between half an hour to an hour for it to kick in. And the interesting part is that you can start hearing people purge or getting into it. Purging is very common with ayahuasca. It's about releasing energy you don't need. And purging, most common one is through throwing up. So you have a bucket, and you have helpers to help you out, but sometimes you need to go to the washroom, you may yawn, you may cry, all those things may happen. So anyway, I started hearing people, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. Because some people were like, crying, and some people were laughing, and some people were yawning uncontrollably, and some people were just like sleeping. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on. For me, how it started, it was visual, like many others. And I remember I had this reel keep playing in my mind, which was I kept feeling people having a hard time, and part of me wanted to reach out to help. And my subconscious mind would be like, no, it's time to take care of yourself now. It's not about taking care about other people. It's because you see, all my life I've been someone taking care of others. And that's part of who I am, or at least who I was back then. But I still believe that, there's an element of helping others, but you need to help yourself first before you can truly help others. So that was like a message that kept happening in my mind. And then the visual aspects kicked in. And I kept having this one vision that repeated like 10 times where I'll be somewhere in space. There was this magical door. Mother Ayahuasca was there, and she would be like, "Hey, come here, Constantin. Let's go through this door." And I would be all excited. I would go to the door, and then my ego would be like, "Nope, we're not doing that." And then the vision would stop. And that happened for, I don't know, throughout the entire night. And that day I didn't go much further than that, right? Because I asked it to be gentle. My ego was like, "No, we're not playing that game right now." But here's the beautiful part with something like Mother Ayahuasca or other plant medicines is that you don't get what you want. You get what you need. And a lot of people had intentions that got nothing in that first night. And they were disappointed. They're like, "Oh, I was just nauseous. I was just this." And those same people, every single one, the second time we did the medicine, which was a few days later, had the most amazing experience. Because you see, what happens is there are certain things that the medicine has to work within you to open you up to receive whatever it is that you want to receive or you need to receive. And I was no different, right? That first day I was kind of opening a few things, showing me a few things because I asked it to be gentle. But then the next ceremony were beyond that. Again, not difficult because I was still asking for it to be gentle. The last two I didn't, and they were deeper. But anyway, that's kind of ideal. I wanted to give you some background for those wondering how this goes and how it happens in reality.
It's interesting how they give you the idea or the permission to ask for the experience to be gentle, right?
Yes.
You're communicating before you even jump in, and I can only imagine what it would sound like that first day where you have people, just a broad spectrum of reactions, uncontrollable yawning
Yes.
versus throwing up and just like yawn, laughing. Like I'd be confused on how to feel, Like,
I was too, to be honest. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but this is interesting. And the great parts, because you're in a community and you're going through something tough together. Science shows us this, right? People bond a lot quicker over anything that's, let's not call it traumatic, but let's call it intimate, vulnerable, right? Because that's what happened. And every day after a ceremony, we would be gathered in a big, again, something like a gazebo, and we would share anything that people want to share. Some people didn't want to share much, some people did. And that brought people together. That was super emotional for me too. I remember I was bawling with people because I could feel their emotions, I could feel everything. And the other plant medicine, St. Pedro, that's what it does. It enhances all your senses. Sense of smell, sense of hearing, but more importantly, sense of feeling and seeing with your mind's eye, which was phenomenal for me to experience. I was like, wow, this is cool. I was like, I don't know how this works, but...
So you did ayahuasca and then San Pedro? Is that
yes,
what...
the way it worked is ayahuasca...
Within the same experience trip?
Yes, one of them. So the way it was supposed to be ayahuasca. On day 2, day 4 would be St. Pedro. Day 6 would be the combination of them with Temazcal, which is a sweat lodge. Then day 8 would be ayahuasca again, and day 10, I believe you finish with, or day 11, whatever, you finish with St. Pedro. But because of how things worked out, we actually did ayahuasca day 2, and then we did the Temazcal day 4, which so you start with St. Pedro, and then you add ayahuasca at the very end. And that was by far the most powerful experience I've ever had in my life, and it was for most people. because not only are you doing plant medicine, but you're inside the sweat lodge for 8 hours. And a sweat lodge that's not higher than maybe, I want to say 3 feet. I mean, you can't really see my hand, but it was very low. So you had to be crunched. You had to sit down quite a bit. And there were like, I don't know, 30, 40 people in something that's no more than like 15 by 15 feet at best.
Wow, that's crowded.
Yeah, but that's the idea, because you get to feel everyone. Literally, when the medicine kicked in for me, it was the first time I sat with St. Pedro. I could feel everything, John. I could feel the pain of other people. I could feel the joy, the sorrow, all of it, to the point that like the most vivid memory I have for the first encounter with this is, that medicine takes an hour to 2 hours to kick in. I had a friend of mine, well, a person that became a friend later on. He was like kind of few seats to my left, so to speak, and I was by the door. So if you imagine a circle, I was by the door that's at the bottom. And he was going through something tough, and he was literally crawling out of it. And one of the things that they tell you when you do any type of energy work, plant medicine and otherwise, do not touch other people, right? Because you transfer energies, there's something that happens, right? But as he was crawling and he was on all fours in front of me there, I felt compelled to put my hand on his back. And when I did that, he collapsed, and we both started crying like I've never cried in my life.
Wow.
And I felt so much pain like I've never felt in my life, but it wasn't physical pain. It was like emotional, spiritual, like all of it. Like I can't even describe it, to be honest. It was so powerful. And I think it went on for like 5 minutes. I don't even know how long. But that was what he needed in that moment, because he was about to give up. And in that moment, because we had that exchange, he was able to go back to his place and continue the journey. And then he had help throughout the ceremony from other people. But that was like my first encounter with like this enhanced feeling emotion, which is something else. That medicine is powerful. I mean, all of them are powerful, but that's when you realize the power of your feelings and emotions. Yeah,
that's very interesting. That enhanced you, I guess, empathetically, and the mere touch of somebody, even though you weren't supposed to, you're like, I'm gonna do it anyways. And then he just transferred some of his pain to you. I mean, I've seen movies about that, right? And just conversations about that. And to hear that you experienced that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, because like what I feel happened there, and it's the idea that you said a great word, that transfer, right? I took on perhaps some of his burden, which allowed him enough space to be able to continue on this journey and heal whatever needed to be healed. And it wasn't like I had a conscious thought, oh, I shouldn't be touching him. It was very instinctive, right? So it felt almost like that carrying energy I was telling you about in the first ceremony. It's like, no, this needs to be done. So it's like very unconscious movement. It's like, okay, and I put my hand on like flat on his back, instantly collapse, and we both go into this emotional release, because it was an emotional release, really, right? Because like when you feel your emotions, when you cry, that's what you're doing. You're releasing your emotions, which, by the way, I've never been good at, because I grew up the way I grew up. And let's be honest, most men have a challenge with releasing emotion. And I'm not saying just men, because I've seen it with women as well, because it's so easy to be put down when you are showing emotion, when you're crying, right? We hear it all the time, and I'm guilty of saying this in the past to perhaps some women. It's like, stop being so emotional. When in fact, being emotional is what allows you to not only heal, but truly get to the bottom of whatever it is that you're looking for.
Right, it's that release. So it's interesting how you provide space for him within your own body, which was, and that might, you're like, let me take on some of your pain. Oh, instant regret.
There was no regret. That's the funny part. There was no regret. So I love that you said that, because you think that there would be, but no, it felt like that was what was needed. It gave me a release. It gave him a release, and it solidified our bond, because we became really close friends after that, right? Anyway, that's a different story, but yeah.
Well, yeah, when you share someone's pain, of course you're going to be really close. Do you, before we get into what you're doing right now, I'm curious, what, if you don't mind sharing, what was your experience when you said, I'm not worried about you being gentle? Like when you said it's okay to not be gentle. You said like the last couple of days, you're like, you know what? Let's just go for it.
Yeah. Now, it's important to know that with this plant medicine, the way it works is that there seems to be always 3 rounds of the medicine, right? So they'll give you the first round, they let you have the experience, because it's supposed to last about 2 hours. And Then they'll come again and they'll give you more if you want to. And then only a percentage of people take it very small. And then a third time and they come back. And some people took 3 shots, some people took 2. Every single time I took only 1 shot of ayahuasca. St. Pedro, I did a full 3 shots every time. But with ayahuasca, I did just 1. And that was more than enough for me. I know that if I had taken more, I would have gone a lot deeper. But there was still a big element of fear in my life at that point. And fear is something that I've been able to shed more and more as I progress on the spiritual journey and realize that fear is what's holding us back from being who we truly are supposed to be in this life and who we are at the source. So the more we shed fear, the more we get to do, right? So, but I didn't know that back then. So back then I was like, Anyway, so to answer your question, I was scared. But I said, you know what? It's my last time sitting with ayahuasca, for example, my last time sitting with St. Pedro. Do your best. Show me what I need to see. And it was tough because the last Aya ceremony was essentially about releasing anger, which I didn't even know I had. And I'll explain how I got that. And then connecting to my inner child. And here's how things beautifully align, and especially looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was beautifully orchestrated. Now, I never had any idea what an inner child was and how we are, a defenseless child at heart. And we have this inner child within us that's wounded in some parts, and it's about providing space to heal and remember who we truly are. So literally the morning of, I would say that last Aya ceremony, which was like day 9 or 10, I wake up earlier than normal. I'm going to this place where people are smoking, which I never go to, but I felt compelled to go to it. And there was this older lady there that's more of they had this thing where people could stay for months. They wouldn't necessarily do plant medicine every time, but they might do once every month or whatever. So she was there, very nice lady. And somehow the conversation came up with the inner child. And I said, you know what? I've heard someone talk about this because a shaman talked about it a few days prior. I said, I have no idea. How do I even connect to my inner child? And she's like, well, what worked for me and what worked for other people is when you're in the medicine, bring up the image of your inner child. And if you have pictures of yourself as a child, that helps to look at them before you go into the ceremony because you have a fresh memory of that. So I thought that was cool. So as I was waiting for the day to get to the ceremony, which ceremonies are always in the evening for ayahuasca, I went and I remember that on my phone, I had pictures from when I was a young boy because my mother's father was big into photography, even though that's, most people don't have access to those things because people didn't take pictures. I had access to that. So the entire day I'm looking through dozens of pictures. Like, cool. And then in the afternoon, I had a session scheduled with a Reiki massage therapist, which I scheduled many days prior to that. And it just happened to be in the day. And she was an amazing, beautiful soul. And we did a Reiki session. And at the end, she's the one that told me, brother, you have so much anger within you. Until you release that, you cannot connect to your inner child. And you see, she didn't know that I had a conversation about the inner child with anyone else because she was one of the helpers. So she was always in the kitchen doing things. I never told her that. So that's interesting that this comes up again. And I asked her, I said, how do I release this anger? How do I connect? And she's like, well, you're in the plant medicine tonight. It's about setting intention. So you can set an intention to release your anger. And then it will allow you to connect to your inner child. And I'll be honest with you, John, it was a very tough ceremony because I took 1 shot and I went deep right away, and it was about anger, and it was about releasing, and that meant purging at the washroom and purging in the bucket. And I was very resistant to the point that I felt a knot in my throat for 2 or 3 hours, and I was resistant to release that. And the medicine wasn't taking me further. It's like I had this inner knowing that if I don't release that, then that's it, that's my journey's done. And eventually there was 1 more break before we were gonna get into another round. So the way it worked, essentially, between every round, they would give you a break to go to the washroom, to freshen up, unless, of course, you had to go to purge. That was a different story. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna go try 1 more time. And that's when it took me really deep. I was able to release the anger, at least the one I had, and I came back and I thought, okay, this is gonna be good. Now, keep in mind, this is like 4 or 5 hours after I took the shot. It's supposed to be gone out of my system at this point because it only lasts like 2 hours. And we get to a point where we're all standing up. We're doing our final thank yous to the fire, to the medicine, to everything else. And as I'm standing up and looking at the fire, and the shaman was across from me, with my eyes open, I go into a full-blown vision. And I'm shown this magnificent art gallery. I saw myself. It happened to be my art gallery. It was the opening night of my art gallery. And I had all these amazing paintings of geographies from different planets. I didn't recognize them. And as he was guiding me the hallway, kind of like a movie following, we got to a set of stairs, and then he went down. And as I got to that, he opened up another portal into a vision with me as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, perhaps drawing and painting, and hearing voices telling me, boys don't paint. You're not supposed to be doing this. You need to go to school, all those things. And also voices about people telling me, oh, you should be drawing this, or you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And in a third person, I saw myself, my older self, grab my young self by the hand and tell him, you paint from the heart. Don't let anyone tell you what to paint. And then the vision stopped. And I was like, wow, okay. So that was pretty much the end of my experience with Aya. We had the same ceremony after, that was different, but this was kind of the end of Aya. So it opened up the door to me connecting to my inner child. Now, prior to that, and I'll end on this and I'll pass it back to you, before it connected me there, once I released the anger, I had a lot of visions with me as a young boy, but I could literally see my mother pregnant with me, like in third person. I saw myself in the crib, every, grandparents and friends and family watching and being excited. So I got to see the various stages of me as a young boy. And then it took me to the other bigger vision I mentioned.
Wow. That's interesting. One, that after everything should have, I guess, melted away, or it's out of your system. Apparently, and then all of a sudden you had that vision. That's pretty interesting. And to connect with your inner child is pretty cool. Would you say you're using that for what you're doing now, as far as like being mindful of that inner child that you have more of a, I guess, an awareness of, or more of an intimate relationship with?
100%. I mean, I see the journey, those 12 days in Ecuador, as pretty much my spiritual awakening and the catalyst to put me on the path that I am right now, and the reason we're even having this conversation to begin with. And the inner child is one component of many that were opened up in that 12-day period. And since then, I've done a lot of work on my inner child through various mentors and coaches, one of them being a hypnotherapist, and that's helped me immensely. I didn't realize I had trauma until I started digging into it. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And the more layers I heal, the more layers come up like an onion, right? But it gets better and better because you're shedding essentially these layers that are not you. And the way I say it and the way I describe it nowadays, I'll grab a pen here for those, again, that can see. So I have a pen, right? It's a gold pen for those that can see. But what's going to happen, this is you when you're born, right? Then you get some ideas from society. It's going to start to get covered up with layers, right? And it's going to be layers upon layers. But what tends to happen is as you start removing layers, you're going to see pieces of yourself. And as you see pieces of yourself, you're like, I wonder if I can see more. And the deeper you go, the more you unravel who you are at your heart, at your heart level, at the soul level. And that's the journey I've been on for the last 2 years. I'm not saying I've gotten to the end of that. I think that's a lifetime journey. Some parts may be still hidden. But once I realized that I wasn't my job, I wasn't my career, I wasn't my choices, I wasn't my lessons, I wasn't any of it, and I was really all that's below that, which is at my heart, that's when it liberated me. And it allowed me to find my purpose, to find my gifts and bring more of them into the world. And it also allowed me to work with my limiting beliefs, with my negative thoughts, and overcome them so I can make progress that appears to be much faster in someone's externally than it may feel for me internally. But people will be like, hey, Constantine, like, you do more in a month than I do in a year. How can you do that? And it never dawned on me how, and we can talk about it if you're interested, but that's what I do today. I continue on my own journey, but I now help people on their own journeys. Through the science, bringing them to spirituality, which is something we haven't talked about. But the idea is that I know how I was before. I feel for people in the situation because there's many of us like that. And the idea is that we can start with what the science tells us and then open up the canvas, so to speak, open up the heart, so you can see that science and spirituality are very connected. You actually wouldn't have science without spirituality.
And First of all, thank you for sharing that, and the visual will definitely help. I definitely understand what you're talking about with that inner journey as you, because I'm doing the same for myself, and yeah, you get to uncover parts of yourself that you forgot about because of life experiences like an onion. And it's, I always smirk or laugh on the inside when someone says we're like onions because I think of Shrek. And it's the funny thing is the first time I ever heard of comparing ourselves to an onion was Shrek. So now it's
Oh,
just
wow.
like that's that ingrained image when someone's like, like we're layers. I'm like, I know.
Beautiful. I love it.
And so I love it. Also, yeah, you bring up a good point where you do come from, like we said earlier, and that's why I wanted to go into your background for people to understand that you have spent a lot of your life really living in your logic self, your left
Yes.
brain self, the physical, tangible self. You got to be when you are dealing with a lot of technology and very technical, and to go and start to bridge the gap from that physical to spiritual and non-physical plane. That ayahuasca trip was it for you. That was the calling. And what you're doing now, like you said, is helping people in that journey. And I know that we're coming to closer to the end of the show, but I definitely want to give you space for sharing. I feel like you tell me. Do you? I feel like you're like I want to share something about bridging the gap from technology and spirituality, and I do feel like maybe the correct question would be, how do you use that experience of yours using the left side of your brain and now transitioning to kind of like jumping back into your right as you had access as a kid. How are you using that in your with your clients, and how you're helping with them with their journey?
No, I love the question, John. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. One thing I'd like to mention there is that in the universes, there are a bunch of different universal laws, right? One of them being the law of balance. So what I have found is that when I started this journey, I made a big jump to the right side, like you mentioned, and tried to ignore more of my left side. But the more I was trying to do that, the more resistance there was. Because if you're too much on the left or too much on the right, it's actually not going to be beneficial for your overall life and mission on this planet, in this incarnation. But if you find a balance or strive for balance, I feel that's the most important aspect that we can do, and that's what I'm right now. What I'm like, I understand that there are things in this material world that work a certain way, and I also understand the spirituality and looking at how do we bridge that so then you can bring the balance for yourself and others. And to answer your question, how I help people right now is I look back at my life and I say, what were some of the big catalysts? Of course, spiritual awakening through ayahuasca was, but plant medicine is not for everyone. And not everyone is going to be like, I'm going to go to Ecuador or Peru or Colombia to do this. And they shouldn't, right? Because again, it's not for everyone. You got to check with your doctor, which I did. You got to do all these things to prepare yourself for. And it's tough. It's not an easy journey. But others have done it through meditation, through breath work, and other modalities. But at the same time, people can start making a lot of progress on themselves, even if they don't believe in any of this plant medicine or any of the spirituality. And that's where I come in, because I look at a lot of my peers in the professional world, not just Microsoft, but other people I've met throughout the years. And many want to improve themselves, right? And we talked about what were the catalysts for me. So one of them was the spiritual awakening, which again is not for everyone, and it might be coming later for some than it did for me in the journey. But then the other two that were really big for me were finding my purpose or my why or my mission in life and the gifts associated with it. So what, meaning that all of us have a set of gifts that we came into this life with, that we brought with us. And they're very apparent in your interactions with everyday people, but you don't necessarily see them. It's kind of like the saying, you cannot see the forest for the trees. And you sometimes need help from others or from yourself if you do enough digging like I did to start finding this. So the reason being is if you know in your heart what your purpose is, if you know what your gifts are, it's going to be much easier for you to bring them into your life. And that's how it was for me, because I did an inventory and I was like, well, I'm not bringing most of this in my life. So there was no wonder I was depressed and anxious and burnt out and even suicidal at times, because I wasn't doing what really brought me joy in my heart. And as I was contemplating, this is something that came up for me only recently, as a big aha moment, because I mentioned the story where people in my life would say, hey, Constantin, how come you do all these things? You have a full-time job, you have a podcast, you help people on the side, now you're building a business, then you have a family life, dogs and all that. How do you have time for that? That was the question. And that comes up, especially from friends that have known me for a while. It's like, wow, that's impressive. And my answer to them was always, I just found my purpose. I know what I want to do, and I spend time doing that. And what really dawned on me is that what I did find actually was not necessarily my purpose and my gifts, and found out what my limiting beliefs were and eliminated them. I actually found time. And this is what I help people who do right now, is I help them in this crazy busy world to find time to do things that they want to be doing in their life. If you want to improve yourself with that found time, sure. If you want to spend more time with your family, amazing. If you want to build a business or have a better career, that's amazing. And it's finding time without giving up anything that you don't want to give up. So if you want to make the same amount of money but find more time, perfect. If you want to increase performance and find time but not sacrifice anything else, cool, we can do that. And what I've come to realize is that in my case, that's what I did. I aligned my purpose with myself. So now what happened? I stopped big distractions. Like I used to be an avid gamer, right? I would work and then I would jump on the computer, play games. Well, as soon as I aligned myself and found that, all of a sudden gaming sounded and felt less important. So literally went almost from a day to the next. I dropped it. Well, guess what? I found 3-4 hours a day in my schedule. Wow. Okay. Then there was Netflix and all the other distractions, like the phone, right? The social media. Like there are ways you can discover. But that's one side of it, right? That's finding time in like whatever you do. But let me give you another example, which usually blows people away, and I'm curious to see your take. Let's say you have a meeting with your manager at work, right? And you're hoping that you're going in to get a raise, and you're like, oh, I did amazing. And you go in, you have your review, and it's not great. For whatever reason, it doesn't have to be with you. It could be that the company doesn't even want to give you a raise because they have no money, or they don't feel like you should get. Now, you get out of that meeting, and you're likely not going to feel amazing, right? It's going to be, you're going to be a bit sad, whatever the case might be, right? Now, what tends to happen when you have thoughts and beliefs that are more on the negative side, and you decide what negative is because it's different for you and I, John, but you decide. What happens then? It triggers, and we know this from psychology, it triggers emotions and feelings. So then if I have a thought that, wow, I can't believe I didn't get this raise, I'm not good enough, right? I didn't do something. That's going to trigger an emotion and a feeling associated with that, which is going to bring reminders from your childhood or whatever, where you felt like that. That's going to go back into your thoughts and beliefs, right? It's going to be another belief. Yeah, I can't believe it always happens to me. This is unfair. Blah, 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 right? And it does this vicious cycle. And then what happens after the stage? Well, there are actions that you're going to take, because the day doesn't just stop. Time doesn't just freeze. You're going to go back to work. You're going to go home. Then you're going to, whatever, maybe it's the weekend. It's going to impact all your actions. Now maybe you're going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix for 5 hours. Or sit in bed and not be able to go to sleep for 3 hours, which is a very common one. So by tackling those limiting beliefs, those negative thoughts, by having tools to be able to actually be like, as soon as you notice them, feel the emotions associated, because of course some things will happen outside of your control, but then let them go, you're essentially finding time. Because that time you're about to waste, well, it's back in your time bank. So essentially you're bending time. When I was telling this to a friend, she's like, oh, you're doing time bending. I'm like, that's a cool way to look at it. And when it dawned on me, I'm like, wow, that's actually powerful, because I don't know about you, John, but I could use another 5 hours in my week. Could you? Could anyone in the audience use another 5 hours in their week? And that's what I help people find.
Very interesting how you positioned it that way, as the benefit, the time. Yeah, I don't want to summarize what you said. I'm like, how would I react? So, Mr. Timebender.
I love
Now, yeah, when you pile on the stuff that you do like and it's part of your lifestyle, yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of things, and people are going to see that. but it's your lifestyle now. And that's what it seems like is happening with you. Your lifestyle has expanded into the things that you're passionate about, and people are like, "Wow, okay, cool. How are you doing all this?" And you're like, "Because it's my life. This is what I
You're right.
do."
I never connected the two and two, and now that I'm like, oh, it makes so much sense. And if you think about it, let's take some common, I'll call them symptoms. Let's say you suffer with imposter syndrome. I call it a symptom because the root cause is something other than imposter syndrome, right? But imposter syndrome is something that many people suffer with. And for those that don't know, it's essentially the idea that at any point in time, someone will figure out that you don't know what you're doing in whatever job you're in or family situation. And that's going to cause a lot of stress for you. There are things such as hesitation, overwhelm, stress, burnout, right? Those are things that come up, fear of failure, fear of success. See how each of those ties back to time. Because if I am someone with imposter syndrome, how much time am I going to waste in my day looking over how I word my conversations or my emails? Or how much energy I'm giving to something that is not important about like how someone perceives me? Like that's time you buy back. How about hesitation? If I'm hesitant, I'm not going to make decisions, which is going to lead to what? Procrastination. And then we know what that turns out into. You gave the beautiful example. Right? You're going to watch Netflix or do something else. You're losing time, essentially. I don't want to say wasting time, because I don't think anything is wasted in this reality. You're just losing it in that moment. So it's about finding it and bringing it back. So every problem in your life, see how it relates to time. Because if you look at, I don't know about you, John, but every person I talk to is like, wow, I'm so busy. I have so many things and I don't have time for myself. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do this. And I want to be doing this. Literally, I do not know one person in my life that says they're not busy. And guess what? I was the same. I was like, yeah, I am busy. Now, when people ask me and they're like, are you busy? I'm like, yeah, I am busy, but I am busy with the things I want to be busy with. I have a choice over that. And most people don't think that. So that's, I would say, very important. And I guess I'll add one more thing. I know we need to wrap up here, but you mentioned the science to spirituality bridge. And what's important to know that everything I help people with is science-backed, meaning that even if you're not spiritual, which is most of my clients, it's all science, meaning psychology and neuroscience. The idea that there's something called neuroplasticity, which they've discovered more recently than you think. The idea that your brain is not set in its ways. You can make changes. There are neural pathways that can be made and changed, which means that you can relearn and unlearn whatever you want, should you want to, right? So if you have a part of you that you don't like, well, this is your chance to change it. And you can start doing research right now, right? Or you can reach out to someone like John or myself to help you on that path. And that's really what this comes down to, is look at what people have discovered so far, if you're not spiritual yet. But if you're listening to this, you're likely very spiritual, which means you can combine the two, and then the power is exponential. And what do I mean combining them? You can introduce meditation with these practices. You can introduce breath work. You can introduce plant medicine should you want to, right? There's so many elements of spirituality. And then you can start looking at how science and spirituality really are coexisting, and how science cannot exist without spirituality. And that's when you get the full power of everything that you do in life.
Yeah. So now that we all know who you are, what are you working on now that you feel would be of benefit for anybody listening, for them when they do get in touch with you?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the chance to do that. So there's two parts I'm working on quite a bit right now as a passion project, as I still work my full-time job. One is the podcast. Like you, I have a beautiful podcast called Unleash Thyself. It's about unleashing the best version of ourselves from within and liberating ourselves from all the indoctrination and all the societal expectations, and finding who we truly are at our heart. And that's a podcast with science and spirituality. And I put a lot of effort and time into that because it's giving me a lot. I'm learning a lot, and then I want you to learn as well along with me. And the second project is essentially this, building this coaching practice, building these programs that can help people on their path. So my mission in life is to inspire, empower, guide, and support individuals on their journey so they too can find joy, fulfillment, success, their purpose in life, and make the world a better place for all of us. So that's my mission, and I look to bring that to everything I do. So what I've shared with you, what I help people with, I've been testing it with people close to me, people in my professional life, and paying clients, and it's working amazingly well. So I'm like, you know what, I need to build something on top of this. And there is a coaching practice being built. There are courses and group coachings coming up as well down the road. But that's been a big place for me, and you and I had some offline conversations around this. So I want to thank you because I got some wisdom from you, and we got to share some stuff, and it's been beautiful. So anyone listening, if you're interested in working with me, like John said, reach out through the links he provides. Remember, my name does not have an E at the end, so anytime you look me up, Constantin, and I know it's funny because that comes up all the time, but I also feel that's a good way for people to remember, because I'll try it with the E at the end, and it's like, doesn't work. Anyway, that's it, John. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, brother. It's been a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on, man. Everybody, check out Unleash Thyself. Links will be in the notes. Once again, thanks for coming on, Constantine. Let's stay connected, man.
Absolutely, brother.